Hi, Kristen here, and I'm doing my video portion of the reflection paper. So my first article that I chose to talk about was the Why Cool is Still Cool article from the New York Times. The article starts off by talking about how originally the word cool meant the temperature, like it was cool outside, and it has evolved into a word that has different meanings. So you could still say that it's cool outside, but at the same time you can say that anything's cool. You could say that movie was cool, or that person's cool, or that song is cool, or the minivan's cool. Like, you could use almost anything is cool. And it's interesting the point that they bring up, that the word cool hasn't died out, but there's so many other words that have come into our vocabulary that have died out. For example, we talked about in class, like the word fleek. When you say something's on fleek, that's a word that it's already starting to die out, and it hasn't even been around that long. But the word cool has been around since the 16th century, which is so crazy that it is still around. Personally, I found that this article was interesting because even myself, I find myself using words for short periods of time where other people don't really use them, or that maybe they do use them, but still I find myself going through phases with words. Like, for example, when I was in, I guess, 6th grade, I was on the softball team, and we would all use the word splendid. Like, we would say, oh, that's a splendid idea, or I'm feeling splendid. But as soon as I left that team, I stopped using the word. So that word definitely was connected to me from the group of people that I was hanging out with. I think that this was also important because as a speech-language pathologist, you also have to understand these kind of words, like the slang words. You have to figure out if it's actually a slang word. So if a patient came in today and used the word on fleek, you have to understand that it actually is a word that is being used in this time and not just a made-up word. You have to know the difference between what's being made up and what's actually a word that's being used by people. The second article that I talked about was the type of word formation from the Popular Linguistics magazine. I thought that this article was really interesting because it talks about how words are formed. I always used to question when I was little, like, who came up with the word magazine, or who came up with the word television? But realistically now, after reading this article, I now know that it came from prefixes and suffixes and clipping and all these different word form processes, which is so interesting that even George Bush in the article came up with a word himself. Like, it's so cool that words keep coming into our lexicon. We keep getting all these different words that are being developed. So I think it's also interesting for a speech-language pathologist, this article, because it discussed morphemes, it discussed clipping, blend, compounding, back formation, acronyms, affixation, and other parts of language that are important. So one of the ones that I always think about is jeggings. I think it's so interesting that someone thought to call these soft pants, jeans almost, jeggings. So the third article that I chose was raising a bilingual child in Miami. I thought that this one was so interesting because it talks about a parent that is Spanish and wants to raise her child to speak Spanish in Miami, and Miami is a culture of Spanish-speaking people along with English speakers. So I think that it's so interesting that she would write an article like that because it kind of gives this basis for other parents who would want their kids to be bilingual too. And I think that being bilingual opens up so many opportunities you can work in a Spanish field, an English field, you can work in all these different, like Miami is a big Spanish-speaking area, and there's other areas, like even areas in the Bronx that speak Spanish, and I think that it's important to be bilingual. I think it's important that we have bilingual people around, especially the fact that in Miami, there's so much culture that can be learned just by knowing Spanish itself. I think that the Spanish people have more of an advantage in that city. And I also think it's interesting the fact that she brought up with preschool and schooling and how her child, she wanted it to go to a school where they would speak Spanish to the child and how they made the bargain with them. I think it's a super interesting article, and I think that bilingualism is really important in our culture nowadays. I personally am pretty good at German. I wouldn't say I'm fluent, but I took it from 5th grade until I just finished my final actually in German. And I personally would want my child to be bilingual. I think that it would just open up so many options for them, and they could go to Germany, they could explore the German culture, and I hope that I can raise my child well enough, and I hope that they will be able to be successful with it. I know it's not Spanish, which Spanish is more important in the United States, but it also opens up, it said in the article, on average, people that know Spanish along with English make $7,000 more, and that's a huge advantage. I think that this article gave a huge perspective of what it's like to raise a bilingual child. Overall, I thought that these articles were really interesting, and I really enjoyed this class. I thought that it was really interesting learning about the different parts of the language and learning about bilingualism and the second languages, and I thought that this class was really fun, and I'm really upset that it's over because I won't be there anymore, but I think that this class taught me a lot, and I'd like to thank you for a great semester. So, have a great winter break.